everyone, and welcome to BHC Studios. Today we'll be doing my review of the brand new Fujifilm X-T5, and I do have the 30mm f2.8 on here. And so I had this camera for the past 3 weeks, been out shooting with it, have lots of photos and lots of thoughts on the X-T5, so let's start the video now. First of all, you look at a camera like this, and then you look at my Minolta XD, right? These are the old film SLRs, and even the size of these two cameras, very similar shooting style. Fujifilm is really smart when they came out with the original X-T1 to sort of reminisce these old film SLRs, and this is my 45 f2. And this 30mm f2.8 works out to be about a 45mm. And so shooting with this old camera, and this, I've been using the MD mount. My dad had an XG1, so this is, my entire life, 40 plus years, I've been shooting with a camera like this. And so to have a camera with all the knobs and the dials and even this focal length of 30mm has really kind of reignited my love for just kind of everyday photography. So this focal length is great, but as well as this camera. And so let's go back a little bit in history of the Fujifilm ecosystem, and it sort of starts with this camera right here, the X-H1. Now the X-H1 came out in the spring of 2018, and Fujifilm called this their flagship. Now this camera was a big deal because it had IBIS, and they also went with this kind of a hybrid setup. It still had the two major knobs there, the dials. They had the ISO dial and the shutter speed dial, but they kind of changed the sort of, even the positioning. See how the shutter angle is more like this, where this is kind of more up this way here like this. So like this versus like this, right? So it's shot more like a DSLR, and this camera here is kind of controversial, right? Because when the X-H1 came out, they called it a flagship, but this was one of the last cameras that had the third generation processor and sensor. The first one was the X Pro 2, and then all the other cameras got it. So this was a flagship, but it was using the oldest sensor and processor. And then a few months later, in I think September of 2018, came the X-T3. Now that camera was an amazing camera. It had the new 26 megapixel sensor, backside illuminated, and it had the X processor 4. Now that processor lasted from 2018 all the way till 2022, and it went right up to the GFX 100. It worked in a medium format camera, up to 100 megapixels, so that was an awesome processor, but the X-T3 did not have IBIS. So here we had this camera, the X-H1, that was the flagship, but had the old processor and sensor, and then the X-T3 comes out a few months later, and not called the flagship, had the new sensor and the new processor, but didn't have IBIS. And in mid-cycle, Fujifilm, to sort of compensate between the X-H1 and the X-T3, was to come out with the X-T4. And I call that a mid-cycle upgrade because every other X-T series was upgraded with the newest, latest sensor and processor, right? But the X-T3 and the X-T4 have the same sensor, the same processor. The big difference was it had IBIS, and Fujifilm put a fully articulating screen. Fujifilm called that the X-T4 the flagship, and they put a fully articulating screen that would be appealing to videographers, but not so much to stills photographers. And so I'm shooting this video on the X-T4. I bought it as soon as it came out because from the X-H1 to the X-T4 was a huge leap in processor, sensor, had IBIS, had the articulating screen, which is great for videography, not so great for photography, but I did like the fact that you can close up the back screen and protect it, much like my X Pro 3. And then when Fujifilm announced their 5th generation sensor and processor, it came out with the XH2S and the XH2. Now I had a chance to shoot with both of them, and it was based off sort of this design philosophy, but they completely removed the shutter speed dial and the ISO dial, and they replaced it with the PSAM, the PASM dial, instead of shooting it more of a traditional way. And so I was happy with the new sensor processor. I love the X-H1. Was not a fan of the PASM layout of the X-H2 and the X-H2S, but I was excited for the new sensor and processor. And so when the X-T5 was announced, of course, it went back to the three-way articulating screen that a lot of us stills photographers. So if you're shooting vertically, right, you shoot like a waist level finder vertical, and if you're shooting down low like this, shooting at waist level, sort of down like this. And so this is something that a lot of stills photographers are looking for. So I would argue that going all the way back from the X-H1, right here, and the X-T3, there was a bit of an identity crisis of which was flagship and, you know, who is Fujifilm targeting. And so it's very clear now. The XH series is for hybrid videographers and photographers, and the X-T5 is really for stills photographers. And so when this came out, I knew I'd be excited to test it. I've had it for the past 3 weeks. Excited, and I'm really happy. I never took out the X-T4 for pleasure, for just pure photography. I always use my X Pro 3. This is the camera that I shoot on my days off, on my vacations, or I use my X100F. The X-T4 was for studio, was for talking head like this, was for overhead video, was for product photography, and even for product photography, oftentimes I actually preferred my XH1 because of the way the articulating screen works. It's kind of hard to explain, but in my studio, in my garage floor, when I'm doing shoots and cameras, it just made more sense to use a camera like this, shooting vertically straight down, having the screen go like this, as well as kind of overhead. It just made more sense for me. So I was going back and forth between the X-T4 and the XH1. Now that the X-T5 is out, this sort of screen style makes a lot more sense for someone like me, except for doing video like this. And so pros and cons, obviously Fujifilm was able to make this smaller than the X-T4 and lighter than the X-T4, uses the same battery, MPW235 battery right here from the X-T4, and yet you can still get more shots, 740 shots, because the processor is more efficient. So it's twice as powerful as the previous X processor 4, this new 5th generation, but also it's more efficient. So you're actually getting more shots. So I mean, it's all good with this new processor. There's no downside to it. You're getting better autofocus, you're getting better battery life, you're getting more powerful features in here, including that pixel shift technology, which I haven't tested yet because I have no need for 160 megapixels, let alone 40 megapixels. So this processor is awesome. The 40 megapixels, probably the one thing that a lot of you may be wondering, you know, do I need 40 megapixels? Now for me, a lot of you guys know I also shoot and review with Leica, and Leica's SL2 has 47 megapixels, the Q2 has 47 megapixels. I'm currently playing with the Leica M10R, which has 40 megapixels, so the same megapixels as the X-T5 and the XH2, but it is a 35mm or full frame format. And so I'll eventually kind of do a test between the two sensors just out of curiosity. So I kind of got used to the 40 megapixels. Now I'm thinking that there's going to be an X-T40. And for those of you that don't want 40 megapixels, we don't know for sure. I don't know if the X-T40 is going to have 40 megapixels or 26 megapixels non-stacked, but we'll see what Fujifilm does. And so if you're on the fence, I would say just stick with what you currently have and wait to see what the prosumer level camera, so the XT double digits, the XT40 probably what's going to be called, or the XE5, maybe even the X100 6th generation, whatever that will be. I think it would probably be V1 maybe for the 6th version of the X100. See which sensor, it will have the same processor, but which sensor would they give? So personally, I would say wait. But one thing is about cropping. Now, a lot of people think of cropping as in cropping into an image, but I did an article for FujiLove. You can go check it out. I'll put the link down below, where I shot with the 65:24 aspect ratio, which for a lot of you guys know is from the old Hasselblad X-Pan, which is actually built by Fujifilm, and in Japan it was sold as the TX1 and the TX2 camera. So it took a 35mm film, and it was almost like a double frame, right? Nominally it was 24:65, and so that aspect ratio, very cinematic. If you could use the 40 megapixel sensor in here and crop it to 65:24, you're getting about a 22 megapixel image. And so Fujifilm, I would love to have that 65:24 crop in the X-T5 and in the XH2, because there's enough resolution that the cameras can definitely handle it. And so in terms of cropping, I love cropping to 16:9 line. I love playing around with 65:24 or any kind of a cinematic wide view cropping. And so for me, 40 megapixels is worth it because I love playing with my aspect ratio. And as well, for those of you that want to shoot a photo, one photo, and you can either go vertical or horizontal, so either going portrait or landscape mode, leave a lot of space, a lot of negative space above and sideways of your subject. And on Instagram or something, or TikTok, you can post it vertically. And then on a website or something, you can post it horizontally. Frame it in a way you can go either way. with a lot of space. And again, with 40 megapixels, you're getting almost 60% more megapixels than the older 26 megapixels. You have a lot of extra pixels that you can sort of play around. So as a commercial photographer, as a professional, maybe you're doing wildlife, sports, birding, being able to crop in is actually a great tool to have. And brands like Leica with the Q2 has that 28, 35 and 50 mil crop because again 47 megapixels, there's enough pixels there where you can't crop in. So that would be the advantage of having something like the X-T5. Now comparing this to the X-T4, if it's basically a smaller X-T4 minus this articulating screen. So all the buttons and dials are exactly where they should be. The back buttons here are actually a little bit bigger than the X-T4, but you still retain that focus select dial here that a lot of us appreciate. And unlike the XH2 and the XH2S, the back and front dials also are a secondary button, and you can customize how those things work. And so in terms of all the buttons, you got your D-pad. It has everything that someone like myself really wants. My only real negative about the X-T5 is sort of the things that everyone's been talking about, which is not being able to attach a battery grip on here because as I mentioned in an older video, Fujifilm basically said that this would be a mid-tier camera. So the XH series is now considered their flagship. The X Pro series is considered luxury. Right, so now there's a distinction between flagship in terms of specs and then luxury. So they're going a different direction with the X Pro. It's not about the top specs, but using titanium and having this hybrid optical electronic viewfinder, kind of luxury sort of features, kind of like Leica M system versus the SL system. And so this is luxury, and the XT series is now considered mid-tier. And so to me, that's a little sad because we've been kind of used to the XT being kind of the unofficial flagship. Even when the XH1 was out, the XT3 was actually a better camera overall, other than not having IBIS. And so this being downgraded to mid-level instead of it being flagship, that's the reason why they downgraded the EVF. Now compared to the XT4, it's the 0.8 times magnification versus 0.75, so it's a little bit larger in the viewfinder here, but it doesn't have that flagship EVF in here, doesn't have the vertical battery grip, again, because it's not flagship. There's an upgraded 1.84 million dot LCD, but I'd rather have a higher resolution EVF than a higher resolution LCD for myself. And also it's using micro HDMI instead of a full HDMI in here. So my only thing is, I mean, would you have paid, so this is $16.99 for the X-T5 right now in USD, and the XH2 is $19.99. And what you're paying for, other than the form factor, is that you're getting the same sensor, same processor, but you have some of those updated hardware features. So would you pay the same price for an X-T5? So let's say there's an X-T5 Pro with the same EVF as the XH2, full-size HDMI, which I know a lot of you won't care about it because this is a still-centric, but also the ability to add a vertical battery grip on here. Would you pay $300 more? Put it in another way, is it worth to pay $300 more to get the XH2, even, besides the ergonomics, for those extra features? I don't know. I know a lot of people are happy that there's dual SD cards, but I actually kind of liked having that option of having that CF Express card, especially for using larger cards, because right now you can get, I think, a 1 terabyte, maybe even a 2 terabyte CF Express Type B card. And so you can, I haven't seen a 1 terabyte SDXC card, maybe it exists, but in terms of throughput, you're not getting the same throughput on the X-T5. So in terms of continuous shooting, you're going to get more continuous shooting out of the XH2 as well. And also downgraded video features, which again, I know for almost all of you guys that are looking at X-T5 don't really care. But for someone like me, who's been using the X-T4 as a hybrid camera, mostly for stills, mostly for testing gear, but also for video, buying the X-T5 for me is a downgrade from the X-T4 minus the new sensor and the processor. And so I'm still kind of on the fence between spending the extra $300, getting the XH2, but not liking the ergonomics, not liking PASM, not liking a lot of things about it, versus the X-T5, almost the perfect camera, a replacement of the X-T3, but with IBIS. The true successor to the X-T3 is the X-T5, not the X-T4. I'm so happy this exists, but it's a mid-level. It's not the top-end camera. So for me, I would pay the $300 for those upgrades that are on the XH2. I don't know what you guys think. Now just quickly to talk about the lens here, the 30mm f2.8. As I mentioned, just like this Minolta, 45mm was Minolta's SLR main. Like a lot of manufacturers had 50mm lenses. Minolta went with 45. On the CLE, which they shared, it's the rangefinder camera that they shared with Leica. Leica had the CL, Minolta had the CLE. That was a 40mm lens. I love 40mm. I love 45mm. So I shot this more as my everyday lens, and as a macro lens, it gets so close that you're getting too close. I'll insert a photo or maybe video, but I was taking a picture of this watch right over here, my 10-11-9, and I was basically like this. It was so close to the camera. So if you want a true one-to-one macro, I would recommend probably getting the 80mm f2.8 because at least there's some distance when you're at one-to-one like that. But for me, I would use this as an everyday sort of an everyday lens that has almost infinite focus, like up to about this close is how close you can get. So you never have to worry about minimum focus. So if you are taking photos of food, if you're just, I don't know, anything you want to get really close to. So here, let's just see how close I can get to this knob here. Let's just see this here. I mean, look how ridiculous that is, guys. Look how ridiculous I am. So pretty much, in all intents and purposes, you can focus as close as you want. So if you want a versatile kind of a street lens as you walk around, this lens is awesome. Optically, it's great. I'm really happy with it. This feels a little loose here. I wish it was a little bit tighter. This is pre-production, so maybe it would be tighter in a production copy. So that's my first shooting impressions of the X-T5. Let me know down below if you guys have any questions, but I will then get the XH2 and the X-T5. I'll talk about both of them, why I would pick one or the other, and eventually by the end of the year, I will end up getting one of those two cameras, and so maybe you guys can guess. And of course, we're all waiting for the X Pro 4, or whatever they're gonna call it, right? Because we're excited. If the X Pro 4 came out right now, or the next X Pro, then I wouldn't hesitate. I would skip over this, get the new X Pro, and then live with the X-T4 for a little bit longer. Because in terms of my video needs, it pretty much does everything that I need right now anyways. And so maybe I should just wait. Maybe I shouldn't buy either of them. We'll see what happens, right? So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy shooting. Oh, I want to be in continuous high. All right, let's do it again. Peace.